Labour has never done well in a UK election without doing really well in Scotland.
We need deposit ATMs and we need withdrawal ATMs, and we need a law that means that businesses have to accept cash.
UK workers have had the most bargaining power essentially since the 1970s because the jobs market is so tight.
Can Britain actually afford to maintain a global military presence?
You're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. Welcome to the programme.
So the fallout continues, Caroline, from the Suella Braverman affair. She wrote a piece for The Times, which has proved pretty controversial. She wrote that pro-Palestinian mobs are largely ignored by the police, and she drew a contrast with right-wing demonstrators who she said are rightly met with a stern response from law enforcement authorities. Her comments come ahead of a planned pro-Palestinian march, which we've been talking about this week, on Armistice Day tomorrow. That is the whole controversy around this has really been rumbling on for the whole week. Sunak's spokesman Max Blaine told reporters that Braverman's piece in The Times was not cleared by the Prime Minister's office, reportedly asking her to make some changes to that piece.
Yeah, look, does Sunak continue to back Braverman? Does he sack her? Does he reassign her? I think all of that still seems to be up in the air. Sunak's spokesman saying that Sunak had full confidence in the Home Secretary. That was yesterday. Then we've had a couple more people talk about this today. The Education Minister, Robert Halfon, saying that Number 10 is looking internally at the matter. That sort of indicates that everything is still, all the options are still on the table. But it certainly seems quite a strange state of affairs.
Yeah, and interestingly, a very senior voice coming out today, Jeremy Hunt, told Sky that words that she used are not the words that I myself would have used. So that is, that is criticism, isn't it, without being directly critical, but really distancing himself from her criticism of the Metropolitan Police. I guess firing or moving Braverman, is dangerous for Sunak, isn't it? It risks angering the right wing of his party. And Braverman does speak for a lot of people, not just Conservatives, but she speaks for people more widely as well. So she's flying these kites. But whether they're welcome or not in Number 10, I think this is causing a lot of trouble for Number 10.
Yeah, look, there is one MP who has come out and called directly for her resignation. Robert Neal, former Conservative minister, he was speaking on LBC. I mean, the Labour leader Keir Starmer's already criticised the comments, saying that Braverman, or suggesting that Braverman's stoking up tensions with her remarks. But look, the protest is going to go ahead at the weekend, we know, but it's all about whether, whether she's broken the ministerial code or not, whether there was approval for the Times article or not, whether it's considered opinion, or, whether that sort of criticism of the police is actually kind of allowed within the ministerial code. Yeah,
and whether it's productive or counterproductive from a party political point of view, I think is an interesting question. All the opposition parties are calling for her to go, but then, they would do, wouldn't they? I guess the more interesting question is whether Sunak thinks she's better on the inside or better on the outside. Clearly, she is a flag flyer for the right wing of the Conservative Party, and if he sacked her, it would be problematic. But he's having problems keeping her on board as well. So I think he's in a pretty tricky position. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we've been speaking to John McTernan about this, political strategist at BCW, also a former political secretary to Tony Blair, former director of communications for the Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard. He is sort of firmly of the view that this shows the weakness of the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. We began by talking to John McTernan about whether Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has actually deviated from government policy. She hasn't briefed against colleagues, and therefore what he thinks the issue is with Braverman's statements around the protest.
It is against government policy to attack the police. She's actually published an article in which she attacks the Metropolitan Police and, in extension, the police force itself for having double standards. That is actually a massive breach of policy of any government. And for a Conservative government, which is meant to be the party of law and order, is huge. And the attempt to pretend that that's not a breach that requires sacking, immediate sacking, is a sign of how weak Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, is.
It's reported that the Home Secretary ignored Downing Street's request to edit her Times piece, this piece that was critical of the police. How serious a transgression is that? Don't senior ministers have a right to express a view?
No, senior ministers don't have the right to express a view. They're bound by collective responsibility, and that means they're not meant to put anybody else in the government, in the cabinet, in an embarrassing situation. Suella Braverman's put the Prime Minister in an embarrassing situation. She's produced something which she refused to take edits from Number 10, even though she submitted the article to Number 10. But she put the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, in a situation where he says he doesn't agree with her. Now, that is clear that there isn't collective responsibility binding on Suella Braverman. She'd said something in a published an article which attacks the police, and the police in the UK are meant to be operationally independent. She should have been sacked immediately for not taking the amendments to the article. Probably sacked for wanting to publish the article. It shows such bad judgment. But she's looking for a fight with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is incredibly weak. And that's what's playing out now, that we're going to have day after day of commentary on, is he strong, is he weak, what's the Tory party really believe? And Suella Braverman is the puppet master in this, which is not a situation any member of the Cabinet should be able to be in.
Surely the difficulty, though, potentially is that Braverman may reflect a significant strand of Conservative opinion, and therefore she plays a key role in Sunak's team.
Well, this is the problem that Rishi Sunak has. When he became Prime Minister just over a year ago, he was the only candidate who was standing. He should have come in and been strong and said, you need me, the Tory party, you need me more than I need you. I'm going to do this on my own terms. Instead, he compromised and brought in Suella Braverman, clearly did a deal with her to get her the backing of her votes. And if you start off as a Prime Minister who's weak, you're always weak. You're only ever as strong as you are on the first day as Prime Minister. He came into the office of Prime Minister, he came into Number 10 Downing Street weak, and this is just being shown now. And the issue he has to confront is he's not going to be stronger if he sacks her in 3 days than he would have been if he sacked her yesterday. At least if he'd sacked her yesterday, he would have shown he was decisive. As it is, he is playing out the theatre of the fact that it is a weak Prime Ministership with a disunited cabinet and a disunited party, which really goes to back up the Labour Party, the opposition Labour Party.
Does this
demands for an election.
Does this not show, surely, though, that the difficulty in dealing with political protest in the UK is the issue not around the kind of inflamed tensions that there are perhaps between, on an issue of geopolitics that is affecting people in the UK?
There is no difficulty in policing demonstrations. The police will police the demonstration as they policed the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, as they policed anti-vax demonstrations. But
trust in the Metropolitan Police has hit a record lows in the last couple of years. There has been criticism of the Metropolitan Police on all of those protests and how they have policed them.
Sure, the problem with the Metropolitan Police is that fundamentally they are institutionally racist and misogynist. That needs to be dealt with, and we have, a commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Mark Rowley, who is unwilling to accept that fact, even though there's been independent reports. There are massive issues about the Metropolitan Police, but the issue that Suella Braverman said, she said that the Metropolitan Police police right-wing demonstrations differently from left-wing demonstrations. That was actually just a lie, because the one demonstration which destroyed the confidence of the public in the Metropolitan Police was the policing of a demonstration by women protesting against the kidnap and murder of a woman by a Metropolitan Police officer. So the crisis within the Metropolitan Police in their public confidence, is all to do with them not policing right-wing demonstrations differently, as Suella Braverman has claimed, but actually in violently policing a demonstration by women peacefully protesting against the murder of a woman by a serving Metropolitan Police officer. So she's got it upside down, and it doesn't add anything to the confidence of the public in the police to see a right-wing Home Secretary trying to bully and boss them around when she doesn't actually believe that they are institutionally racist or institutionally misogynistic, which they clearly are. That distance is massive too.
She was making the point, I think, that liberal causes tend to be policed more gently, with that exception, than right-wing extremists or football fans.
She didn't quote that as an exception, did she? She just something that was absolutely a lie. And,
what do you think that Suella Braverman is...
Politicians don't tell the truth, but they should, by and large, not tell blatant lies, right?
Well, what do you think Suella Braverman is trying to get from this? You know, she's dominated the news agenda, or has tried to for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, no. I think, look, she's trying, I think, relatively successfully to be the favourite in the inevitable election for the Tory leader in opposition. That's what she wants to be. She wants to have the Braverman party, not the Tory party. Now, it may be that she thinks now she can, because she's shown the weakness of Sunak, that she has a chance of driving him out and being the sixth Prime Minister in 6 years, which would, I think, just get punished even more by voters in Britain who are sick of this government. But I think she's definitely on big manoeuvres, and she's probably exposed more weakness in the PM than she thought she would, because I imagine she was hoping to be sacked, and she could be a martyr on the backbenches, prepare for opposition, and say the government's inevitable general election defeat next year is nothing to do with her. So I think she's probably gained more from this article than she thought.
Do you think that Sunak agrees with Braverman? Is that why he's not sacked her?
No, I don't think he believes that you should. I mean, that the police are wrong in this. He doesn't believe that the police differ in their policing of different demonstrations depending on the politics of them. I think he is not a politician. I think he's fundamentally a city boy who wants to be a tech pro. And we saw him this last week humiliating himself by basically virtually on bended knees interviewing Elon Musk. I think he's weak in every dimension of politics. He's not decisive. He doesn't know what he believes in. He wants to be a candidate of change and says he's going to ban regulate pedicabs in London. I mean, it is both pathetic and pathetic to watch him.
John, clearly you have a partisan view, and you think that the Home Secretary should go. But what would be a good move politically for Rishi Sunak? What do you think? Is it better to have her on the inside or on the outside? I appreciate you don't care about that, but just from his point of view.
If I was his political secretary, I would have said sack her immediately. Because in politics, in a crisis, there's a universal law, which is you should do quickly what you're going to be forced to do slowly. And he's going to be forced slowly to sack her. So if that's going to be the end game, do it now. Do it as quick as you can to give yourself. He's got a weak hand, but it doesn't mean you have to play a weak hand weakly. You can play a weak hand strongly. That's the essence of poker. It's the essence of politics.
Yeah, rip off the band-aid. Okay, I get that point. Look, in a strange way, and other people have seen this too. Actually, the concern had been around whether Keir Starmer was strong enough to lead. I mean, poll numbers aside, which obviously show the Labour Party ahead, the comparison has been about, who is the strongest leader, and Keir Starmer doesn't always come out the best in that. And yet he has trodden a very difficult line for his party when it comes to the Israel-Hamas war. Do you think that he is able to hold that line, also in the face of a lot of internal criticism and discontent with his stance when it comes to the Israel-Hamas war within Labour? Does he stick to that line? Does that show strength? Or, again, is it divisive within the Labour ranks?
Well, people have been complaining for a long time that they don't know what Keir Starmer stands for. Well, they certainly know now his position on a big geopolitical issue. And yes, it has caused friction in the Labour Party, though I think that's sometimes overstated, in that what people in the Labour Party who are calling for a ceasefire want is peace. That's not an ignoble ambition. It's just that a ceasefire requires two sides to agree. And Hamas have no intention of having peace with Israel. They could have peace by releasing the hostages. So Starmer has to stand where he stands, because it shows people what he thinks. It shows you what he'd be like as a Prime Minister, what he'd be like with the challenge that the Prime Minister has to have, which is take a position on geopolitics. And to face down his party shows him as being strong, not weak. And I think, of course, he's going to stick to it for two reasons. One is he believes it, and two is it does have a payoff in terms of the way that he looks for the voters, and that's important.
In terms of Keir Starmer, there's lots of comparisons to Tony Blair, and Blair had a lot of charisma, and that's the accusation against Starmer that isn't perhaps there. He's more technocratic also. How do you characterise and see Starmer and the path to the next general election?
So a few things that are important. Tony has said, when he took over as leader, he'd had Neil Kinnock and John Smith preparing the ground for him. And he said, Keir Starmer took over, he had the opposite. He'd had Jeremy Corbyn destroying the ground, salting the ground. for the Labour Party. And Keir's basically taken the Labour Party from the position of 1984, where we were after our worst election defeat until 2019, and take us to 1996, which is before one of our greatest election victories. He's taken us on that journey in 2 years, because he didn't actually have time during the pandemic to make an impact. He couldn't get out and about, he couldn't actually meet the public, and he couldn't be very critical of the government. So I think he's done this amazing job, and he's governing in the second quarter. He's going to be governing, if he gets elected, in the second quarter of the 21st century. Very different from the end of the 20th century when Tony was governing. So I think the way he is in contrast to Johnson, the chaos of Johnson, the personal, we've had charisma, haven't we, with Johnson. The country doesn't want charisma, it wants steadiness, it wants a bit of technocracy. Second, the country wants stability, and Keir's offer is stability for 2 terms. I think same prime minister for 2 terms, the same chancellor for 2 terms.
The country doesn't need stability. The country needs growth. It needs economic growth. It needs 20 years of a hit to living standards and very high taxation. The UK needs growth outside of the EU.
No, stability is the fundamentally requires, because we're currently suffering from the cost of instability. I'll repeat it again. 5 prime ministers and 7 chancellors in 6 years. We're not Italy, but we have a government acting as though we're Italian. And that gives you what we know happens, which is the moronic risk premium. We're paying a premium for instability and interest rates caused by this government, caused by Kwarteng and Truss. And if you replace that instability with stability, you create the conditions for growth. You lower the cost of capital. You lower interest rates. You do so many things that are the base of growth. Instability is fundamentally antithetical to growth. And stability is not the only thing you need, but it's a necessary condition.
John, just a last thought then on as we think about the weekend and the protest that will go ahead on Saturday. Yeah. I mean, do you expect to see many more of those? Do you think that there is more appetite for that? We've seen 4 weekends of it in the UK. Just your reading of the UK public now on that issue of Israel-Hamas.
So the UK public want peace. The demonstrations will continue, in my view, and they're absolutely legitimate demonstrations. People want peace. They want to see an end to the conflict. I hope that Hamas are watching and listening. I hope that Hamas release the hostages. If they did that, that would be an amazing first step towards actually de-escalating the conflict, to create the humanitarian aid in there, but most importantly, to start the conversations that will get towards justice and security for Palestinians and for Israelis, which is a safe and secure 2-state solution. So it is important to understand that people believe that their expression of opinions can sway global events. I think if you had a world in which people thought their voice was irrelevant, that'd be terrible for democracy. I do not believe that a ceasefire is the right route to solving what's going on in Gaza, but I don't think it's an ignoble ambition for people to want a ceasefire, because what they're saying is they want peace. Everybody wants the conflict to stop apart from Hamas, and we have to find a way to accelerate the conflict stopping. And in that sense, I don't think the divisions within the Labour Party or between the public and politicians are as stark as actually the divisions inside the cabinet at the moment.
John McTernan, former political secretary to Tony Blair and now political strategist at BCW. Thanks so much for joining us on Bloomberg UK Politics.
So that was the discussion around the Israel-Hamas issue, how it's affecting the UK, the protests over the weekend. That issue, though, how much resonance does it have with voters? Maybe not quite as much, I would argue, as the economy, and actually how much growth and how well we're doing in terms of wages and economic growth. And we had a bit more data out about that today, which actually perhaps was not as dire as we might have thought, Yuan. Yeah,
lots of dire forecasts. We've had some good news today. The good news was that the UK economy didn't grow at all in the 3 months to the end of September.
What?
That actually was good news, because economists were expecting some contraction in those 3 months. But yeah, you wouldn't really call it a stellar performance, but it was just slightly less bad than we've all been talking about over the last few weeks. Our friends at Bloomberg Economics say there isn't much to celebrate, though, as it's really a very small margin and growth has been tepid really for the whole of the year. The Bank of England thinks that growth is going to continue like that next year as well.
Yeah, basically the good news is we're not in a recession. Okay. The point that concerns people, though, is that imports dropped, consumer spending, business investment and government spending also all fell over the quarter. So that's over the 3 months. And so that leads us to the conversation that Stephen Carroll has been having, because Stephen managed to get out of the office and out of our lovely radio studio.
Released from custody.
Into the wild of talking about economic growth, actually with some fantastic people, including the British Chambers of Commerce.
Yes, the event at Battersea Power Station is called the Grow Summit. It's for scale-up companies, or sort of grown-up startups. And we recorded a special episode of Bloomberg's In the City podcast there with the president of the British Chambers of Commerce, Martha Lane Fox, and Silicon Valley investor Pete Flint of NFX Partners. They had lots to say about what the government can do to help startups create growth. Let's take a listen.
There is just so much we can do enabling government to be more active in engaging with startups, but opening up the public sector. You know, every single one of those brilliant lightning pictures earlier needs government actually in this country, not everywhere, to help them really scale. And so, in my opinion, that's another place that the UK could really lead, and London could lead specifically in terms of really making sure that we are ensuring the procurement process is open to startups in a way that it is just not at the minute, ensuring that our ministers are able to talk about AI competently. We're not just interviewing Elon Musk on stage. So all those things are really careful, active policies that we can make and change. So I think there's a huge opportunity. We're not done yet. It's much better than it was, but there's a way to go.
Does that mean a different government would help?
I don't know.
Okay. But I think the UK has had, I mean, it's changed a lot in the last 20 years, but the last 5 years has been particularly beneficial. We think of what are the hottest sectors in tech, and it's debatable who you speak to, but clearly fintech, clearly AI, clearly the intersection between computation and biology. All those areas are incredibly strong. And I think, you know, the UK fintech environment is incredibly strong. AI, clearly the sort of like academic meets deep mind, is sort of long history of success. And then the bio stuff is very interesting. So I think there's, you know, this stuff doesn't happen overnight, but there's momentum in the market. The other piece I want to touch on, just that you spend a lot of time in Silicon Valley, is that you know that Silicon Valley is not the success of Silicon Valley is not because people were born in, I don't know, Idaho and then moved to Silicon Valley. They weren't, you know, moved from Palo Alto to San Francisco. It's the story of immigrants. It's absolutely the story of immigrants. I think that, you know, 50% of the unicorns, to choose that, you know, definition, is have a founder who is a first-generation immigrant. Something like 2/3 are second-generation immigrant. And we all know the stories behind the successful immigrant founders. And the immigrants really do create the startups.
Do you think the UK doesn't have that?
No, I think it has it in spades. I think it's like they're I mean, look, it's a, you know, everyone has a different opinion, but I think it's like, I think the potential for immigration, and Brexit is obviously a sort of a negativity to it, but I think it's, compared to many other places in the world, it is a great environment for immigrants to come, and the government's doing their bit to help the visa process.
Not enough. I mean, I think the elephant in the room when I meet businesses that are not to do with the digital sector, when I'm travelling about as president of the British Chambers of Commerce, which I was in Stoke yesterday, I was Doncaster a couple of weeks ago, the single biggest issue that companies that I meet there around about the place face is people and skills, and they point directly to issues related to Brexit, and specifically that the short-term visas and contracts, that list that the government opened up is not long enough, doesn't encompass all the things that they need. So I don't think we have that conversation enough in the open. I don't think politicians are brave enough about it. Brexit affected the skills base, full stop, in my opinion. And I think we need to be able to address that head on before we really can power up more.
What specifically, in terms of professions or skill sets, need to be on that list? What's missing?
More, I mean, across the board. I don't think I could even, you know, it's well known about hospitality through to manufacturing, engineering, software, whatever, but it's across the board. I haven't met a business that said to me, oh yeah, I'm fine. I can recruit whoever I want. I can retrain whoever I want. I can retain whoever I want. It isn't like that, I think, in the economy right now.
How can scale-up companies advocate best for themselves when it comes to the government, people in power who make these decisions? What's the best way for companies to advocate for themselves to make the changes that you're talking about?
I mean, it's be in networks. I mean, you're here in a network. It's a powerful one that it's unrecognisable to 10, 15 years ago, the networks that exist. So embrace them and be part of them. You know, I am president of a network of businesses, some digital businesses, but 100,000 that probably aren't so much digital across the country. There are so many ways to engage, and you absolutely should. We're coming up to an election, so you will never find an unfriendly politician if you run a business. They love you right now. You know, it used to be that I'd see people when I was wobbling through the Lords, and they might go away from it. They might think, oh, she's going to come and badger me about not having enough people on the internet. Now they're like, Martha, hi, how's it going with all your members? So it's a really good moment, and I think it's very important as a leader, as a scale-up company, as an entrepreneur, to be engaged in these discussions and to be fighting for the things that you think you need around you.
Is there one kind of key message you want the people in this room to be?
No, I mean, I think the key message is actually laddered up. It's a bit more meta. I think the key message, and I think this is why it's important, is because you want to bring people who are not just the entrepreneurs with you in the country. So it's a message of support. We will not do what we want to do in this country without growth. Full stop, right? We won't have the public services. We won't be able to have the kind of society that I think we probably all aspire sort of, collectively to live in if we don't have growth. And that will come from business. That's it, right? It's not very complicated. I'm not an economist, but that's it. So we need businesses to grow. And right now it's patchy in this country. So we need to be robust about what will take our economy forwards. And we need to continually talk about how to get growth at an individual level and at a collective level. And it's brilliant to see politicians of all shade saying the word growth, but we need them to follow through with what that actually means in terms of policy action.
So that was Martha Lane Fox of the British Chambers of Commerce and Pete Flint of NFX at the Grow Summit in London. And you can hear that full conversation on the In the City podcast over the weekend, wherever you get your podcasts.
So talking about a podcast on our podcast, all right, we'll let you have that one this time.
We're like Russian dolls of podcasts.
Yeah, it is the thing, isn't it? Right. We hope you have an enjoyable weekend. That's it from us, though, for today. Of course, we will be back on Monday with more UK politics.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Rich Subnani. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe. You can always give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen. As I say, we'll be back with more on Monday. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.